so happy to see you back out here in this segment of Seed Time and Harvest, where we're learning how to grow our food practically wherever we are. And so let's review for the sake of those of us who are joining us who weren't here last week. Cerise, what did we talk about last week?
Well, last week we learned about a vertical grow basket where we can have a garden for under $10. We can stack it up and take advantage of a small space to be able to provide for ourselves a wide variety of produce. And we also talked about potato and sweet potato.
The crisis food.
Crisis food. And how many of you were able to purchase your potatoes? Okay. You see some hands there. How many of you have potatoes at home that have already started sprouting? Good.
All right, so
That's
we
wonderful.
see some hands.
That's wonderful. And so what will we be sharing today, Jose? Actually, we had a question that we wanted to address before we get into the actual physical aspect of today's presentation. What was that about, Jose?
Not
Watering.
sure. What was the question?
Watering. Someone wanted to find out, how do we water?
Yes. Okay, now she stumped me there for a second. Somebody was asking us a question.
Right.
And they were wondering, how often should we water? When should we water? And so this is probably a question that you probably have right now, especially those of us who are sprouting our tomatoes and have transplanted them. How often do we water them? And what would you tell them, Cerise?
Well, you water based on the need of your plants. First, we're going to look at an indoor garden, and then we'll talk about outdoor gardening. When you have an indoor gardening, you control the environment, so you will determine how much water your plant needs. By literally looking at a pot, you cannot tell whether or not it needs water. And so you will have to touch. If your top inch or so is dry, then you would water. Because a lot of people, Jose, they overwater their plants.
That's right.
And how do they do that?
Well, there's some factors that you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about, am I giving it enough water? And that is, number one, you have to determine what kind of soil the plant is in. Also, you want to think about where it is planted, the temperature.
That's right.
These things play an effect on how much you need to water it. For example, if you're in a dry, hot place, you're going to have to water more. And if you're in a cool place, you're going to have to water less. So this is an important factor. The soil, the sand will not hold the water. And so if you're in a sandy soil, you will have to water more than if you're in a clay soil, which will harbor the water. It will hold it. So these are the things that we want to keep in mind when we're watering.
And we're going to show a picture. If we can have a picture on the screen that shows a plant that's overwatered. Sometimes you'll see your leaves starting to get brown or yellow, and you realize that, oh, my plant is dying. Let me pour some more water. You're actually killing your plant faster. And then the next extreme is underwatering. A lot of times we get busy and we make an attempt to say, okay, I need to water it today, but then we forget. And the difference, how you can tell the difference between an underwatered plant and an overwatered plant. When you overwater your plants, especially if you have thick stem plants, the stem may crack, the leaves will start getting brown or sometimes yellow. Now for underwatered plants, if you can have that picture, your plant wants to hold on to the water. And so when you have a plant that's underwatered, you'll see the leaves starting yellowing at the bottom first, because it's always going to want to hold on to the young shoot so that it will preserve itself. Sometimes you'll find root exposure and the ground cracking, as we saw in the previous segment. That would show that your plant needs water. All right? And so
for underwatering, what your plant is telling you is that I'm dying. I'm dying. Yes. Please give me some water.
Right.
And it'll give you signs of that by the withering flowers or the withering leaves.
Right.
Also, it will get so bad if you don't give it water that the leaves will start falling off. Right. So these are good indications of give your plant some water. And of course, you want to water your plant. You want to give it some water.
Because if you take care of it, it'll feed you. And the general concept is you water early in the mornings or late in the evening. However, if you're in Florida, where we have 10 hours of consistent high temperature, if you wait for that evening when it's cool to water your plants, it's going to be already stressed, and you're going to make a lot of damage to your plants. So it's good to water as needed throughout the day The difference is when you water in the midday, you don't want to just barely water because, of course, the water is going to evaporate. So you want to deep water your plants so that the roots will go down instead of staying close to the top. So you'll have stronger plants.
That's right. You want to encourage those roots to go down deep so that you can have a strong plant. And also, you want to keep in mind, if you have the plant indoors, you're going to be watering less versus if you have it outdoors. Because then the water will be evaporating. You may have to water more than twice a day. If you're living in Florida, for example, you may see the soil start to dry up quickly, and then you may have to water as needed. So that's another thing that you want to keep in mind, is that you are watering as needed. You're looking at the plant. It's like taking care of someone. You want to make sure that you're meeting the needs.
That's right. And with that in mind, the next thing we're going to talk about, we want to actually bring this plant up here, Jose, if you could help me. All right. How many of us know what this is? Carrots.
All right, we have some gardeners. All right.
All right. And what are some of the benefits of carrots, Jose?
Carrots are good in beta carotene, they're good in vitamin A, and they're good for your eyes. So if you are liking to read a lot, liking to study a lot, carrots are a great amendment for you.
And what we want to share with you today is a concept called succession gardening. Has anyone ever heard of succession gardening? Okay, so what succession gardening is, you plant say for instance, every 2 weeks so that you have a consistent supply of food. Because what happens if this is all the carrots we plant, we harvest all our carrots, then how long does carrot take to grow, Jose?
Approximately 85 days.
About 85 days.
75 to 85.
Right. So if we eat all our carrots, then we plant our seeds, what's going to happen? We're going to have to wait all that time to be able to have carrots. And so reason why carrot is an ideal crisis food is because not only does it store long, but it does not require much space. Depends on the need of your family. And you plant every 2 weeks to be able to have a consistent supply of carrots. And in Florida, you can plant it all throughout the year.
Right.
Now, what else can we learn about carrots, Jose?
Well, let's learn how to sow some carrots.
All right.
We want to learn how to sow them into the ground. So what you want to do is you want to take a tool where you could draw a line in the dirt. And so you'll do that. You'll draw a straight line. And that's going to be about maybe roughly a 1/4 inch from the top. And that's where your seeds are going to be sown into that ditch there.
Right. With carrots, you plant 1 seed and you'll only get 1 carrot. So based on the amount of people living in your household, you want to plant. If you love to juice, of course, you'll plant more. If you love carrots, you'll plant a lot more because, of course, you only get 1. And generally, you sow your carrot seeds. They do not do well with being transplanted. So these have to be sown directly in the ground.
That's right.
And when you sow your carrots, you don't necessarily have to thin them out, but why is it that some people thin their carrots, Jose?
Well, the reason that you thin your carrots is because you want it to have girth. You want it to be fat. So if you don't do that, then they will be long and skinny. So when you trim, or like she said, you know, the way that we do that is by clipping it, because we also don't want to upset the root system, because it is a root. So the way that we, what's the word I'm looking for?
When you trim your carrots, when you make it, you basically create more space for the plant beside it to get fat. So you're gonna trim the root, that is. But you don't, as Jose said, you won't want to pull out your carrots, because what happens with carrots is if you pull the root out, it's gonna mess with the other roots surrounding it because they're so close, and so you will not have sufficient growth. Another thing with carrots too that you want to do is till your soil really good and remove anything that will upset the roots of your carrot, because we have a forked carrot. We can show a picture of a forked carrot. And this is a carrot grown in an area, maybe a clay soil, or you may have a rock. It's going to go around it. So you find some nice looking carrots. Still edible, but those are not the best for storage. You want perfect carrots for storage. And how do we store carrots, Jose?
Well, the way we store carrots, before I go there, let me just show
Okay.
them how we would do this. If we can get an overhead shot here. What we would do is we would just cut right at the base here. And this would stop it from growing now.
That's right.
And that carrot there will not grow anymore. And so you keep doing that. You trim it up.
Yeah, basically you just trim your carrot as needed, however many you want in that space. We don't trim our carrots really wide because we get more. While you don't have that fat, nice, juicy carrot, but you still have the longer ones that are still just as good. If it doesn't have the space to get wide, it'll be longer. So that's the main difference. People who love big carrots, they'll trim them. And so every 2 weeks, we will plant more carrots so that when we harvest this set, we know right after we'll get more carrots. And the wonderful thing about carrots is you don't have to pull it out.
That's right.
Why is that, Jose?
Well, it depends when you sow them.
Right.
If you sow them towards the middle of the summer, then that way they'll be ready to harvest during the end of the fall season.
Close to
And
winter.
then it'll be cold at that time.
Right.
And so they won't grow anymore. And so in Florida, you can actually keep them in the ground during the winter without pulling them out. And that'll actually be a way that you can store your carrots. During the winter, you go out there and you'll pull out as needed. And another way that you can store, it would be if you live in the northern areas, you can actually have a root cellar. You can actually have a root cellar. And so these are more advanced things that we can show you later on.
Right.
But what we're going to show you now is how would you store the carrots.
Right. Another thing is if you're in an area that receives snow, what you will do, you'll dig a foot of the ground out, you lay your carrots in that soil, you replace it, then you put another layer of carrots on top, then you put another layer of soil. So once the area is cold, the carrots will not grow. Now, when it starts to get warm, if you put your carrot in any warm spot, it's going to get woody and it's going to lose its sweetness. And that's why it's best to harvest your carrots either early in the morning or late in the evening. That's when the sugar content is higher in your carrots, and so you get that sweet carrot. Now, to store your carrots so that it lasts the longest, what you would want to do is, let's imagine this is the bottom of a refrigerator.
And what you would do is you would get a bag and put some holes in it. Now, the reason that you want to get some holes in the bag, and for our viewers there, is because you want to have 95% humidity. And you want it to be stored in a cold temperature. So right around 32 degrees
Right.
and 95% humidity. This is ideal for storing carrots. And so we're going to create that atmosphere inside your fridge. And by doing that, we are first putting the holes in the bag. Then,
We get our
as
paper
Charisse was
towel.
doing,
You don't want your paper towel to be soaking wet because, of course, your carrots are going to grow if they're wet. You'll find that sometimes when you, well, first of all, when you harvest your carrots for storage, you do not wash your carrots. No, any ground produce that you're planning on storing, you do not wash them. You just dust the extra dirt off of it, and you just get your paper towel, you wet it, damp it, actually, not wet it. You put it in the bottom of your refrigerator, and you can use this for any roots that you're going to store in your refrigerator. If you don't want them to go bad or get spoiled, you'll put your paper towel, which would help create that humid environment. You're going to put your carrots in the Ziploc bag with the holes so that they can breathe. You're going to seal it, and you're just going to put it in your refrigerator, and this way it can store up to 3 months in your refrigerator. If you do not have refrigerator space, you can get a 5-gallon bucket. What you will do is you get some sand or peat moss. You'll damp your peat moss or your sand to make it cool. You'll put your carrots at the bottom. You put the layer of sand or peat moss first, then you put your carrots on top, and basically you're making a lasagna.
that's right.
Right?
So
And-
you're interchanging between the carrots
Right.
and the peat moss or the sand, and this will create a barrier between each one, and also it will keep it cool. So you don't want to put it in the garage.
Right.
You want to put it inside your house because it's going to be more of a controlled environment for you to store your carrots.
Right.
And so you can also do this by the methods that we showed you without any form of electricity. And this is going to be necessary if we are going through a crisis.
That's right. That's right. And the same process you can use for your radishes, your turnips, your beets. Also, the carrots, if you're harvesting your carrots, you can also juice the leaves, which are also packed with nutrients. Now, the next thing we're going to demonstrate is another crisis food that will be able to store for how long, we would say, Jose?
Well, let's see if they can guess. But before I ask them, we forgot to mention that the way that you would water your carrots is with a slight mist, because you don't want the seed to come up to the top if you have too much water.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you mist the top of the soil so that it slowly goes down and gets to the seed.
Right.
So you don't want to spray it down and hose it down or anything like that and then have the seed go all over.
Scatter all over. And our soil was already wet, so we don't need to water.
That's right. And so for our next demonstration, we're going to ask you, this crop that we're going to show you is another essential crisis food. It's high in proteins. It's also stores for a very long time, like she said. Mm-hmm. You can even store it for up to 30 years.
30 years.
Amazing. And
also,
we're going to have you guess what it is.
It's also iron, vitamin B6. You'll get your iron. As Jose said, protein.
You'll probably
fiber,
find it in your pantry. Hopefully it's not canned. Hopefully it's in a dry bag. All right, I knew that would give it away.
Beans, yes. Beans are excellent crisis food. As many of you may know, stored properly, beans can last up to 25 years in a mason jar. Now, we have different varieties of beans. What we find is that, are you familiar with garden beans? Garden beans. You have several varieties of garden beans, which involves your bush bean, your Taylor bean, your pole beans, among others. Are you familiar with those? White beans.
White beans, black beans, red beans.
Bush beans are actually white beans. And these beans will take, how long will it take, Jose, to grow?
55 to 60 days, and it'll begin flowering.
Mm-hmm. Our planting days for our beans was February 19th. And already you can see we have beans. And these are excellent for a crisis. Because as you can see here, we even have a bean plant on our living wall that's already producing beans in this small container. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I don't have land for beans, because even in a small container, you can have beans. Now, the relative of the bush bean are pole beans. Are you familiar with pole beans? Okay, well, if you have space and you want a lot of beans, that's the bean to plant. Because we planted...
Too many.
No. I think we planted like 3 pole beans and it took over. It went
We were plucking beans and it was like, this harvest is never going to end.
It's never going to end. And that's the beauty of beans. The more you harvest, the more the plant produces. And it will keep producing. With the bush beans, you don't need that much space as the pole beans. So here we have, but before we show it to you, we're going to demonstrate how easy it is to grow bush beans.
Germinate. We're going to show you how to germinate the beans.
Yes, it takes 55 days for you to be able to start your harvest. And so we're going to get our beans very similar to the method that we use to sprout our tomatoes. And some of you may have done this in school. What we will do is we're going to wet our paper towel. And then we're going to make sure that we squeeze the extra water out of it, and we're going to put it in our cups. And you may want to do this with several paper towels. And this is going to give the condition it needs. We're going to get our moisture. We're going to put it on top of our refrigerator or by a window, so we're going to get the heat. Also, we're going to get the air, because our cup is going to be open, so we're going to get that oxygen that we need for our beans to grow. And it's very easy. Within a week, your bean plant will start to grow. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it to the corner of the cup. So it's not even going to be inside the paper towel. It's going to be in the corner of the cup. And within a few days, you're going to see your bean sprouting. And this is just awesome. This is just wonderful. And that's it. You just put it in the corner. You can see the corner of your cup, and that's all you have to do. You let it stay, and it will start to grow. Now, when it's about this height, you'll see that actually when it's this size, we're going to transplant. So we're going to show you how we transplant our beans, which is very similar. You want to make sure that your pot is very wet. Now, Jose, we have our bush beans here. Why are they so close?
Okay, so for bush beans, they are ideal if you are growing them inside because they don't take up that much space as the pole beans. The pole beans will grow and grow and grow, but the bush beans will be a more isolated growth. So we can put them right next to each other, and they actually help support each other up. Whereas the pole beans, you actually have a trellis or something that they will need to coil upon because
right.
they will be like a vine.
If you don't, it'll just make its own home in your garden.
Right. That's why they call it the pole bean, because it will rise up in the vine, and then the bush bean will bush up.
Right. And with the pole bean, the reason why you put it on a pole too, it also helps with harvesting because the pod will sink under the green if you allow it to just stay on the floor. But if it hangs on a pole, it'll be easier for you to harvest. And so with our beans, simply, you want to go.
One thing I wanted to mention is that the beans, you have to make sure when you're transplanting that you have a very moist or wet root because you don't want it to get shocked too much.
Right.
So it must be well watered. And this one is well watered already. So we're going to go ahead and transplant that. So how we do that is just simply pull out and push this back in here.
And there you have it. With the bush beans also, as we said, it's a good succession crop. It's so small, you can have many of these in your home. I would recommend 8 plants per person living in your home if you want to store beans long term. And every 2 weeks you plant bush beans and you will just continually get a harvest. The more you pick, the more you will get. You can harvest the beans when they're young if you want to put them in a salad or if you want to steam them. They're good when they are tender. But if you want to store them for a longer time period, you let it stay on the plant until you're able to actually feel the actual beans in the pod. Then you'll harvest and let it dry completely, and you can store your beans in a
Let me give them
jar.
a tip. Yes. Let me give them a tip. Even the beans that you have in your pantry in the bag, you can take those beans and put them in a mason jar and actually have them last longer. Because if you don't do that, what will happen is you will have to have them soaking for a lot longer. And you know, somebody once asked me, you know, I cooked these beans, I soaked them for so long, and they still were hard. I couldn't understand why. And I didn't know why until recently when I realized when you store the beans, you want to make sure they don't get too dry, even though they are dry. And the way that you can keep them with some kind of moisture is by putting them in the mason jar. And this way you could store them for much longer.
And that would also prevent weevil, because can you imagine if you store food for your harvest and then when you go to cook your beans, you see those little black things crawling out. You know, so when you do the mason jar, it's harder for insects to get in your beans, and so you'll have beans for a long time. And the more you harvest, the more you'll be able to grow.
That's right.
And we also want to share with you that we are going to encourage you to start your beans. And so each person here today will get their beans as well as a handout before you leave. Please, I'm going to encourage you, as we see there is urgency for us to start somewhere. It takes 55 days to be able to harvest your beans. And so if you start today, you are one day closer to be
So,
to
you
your
know,
harvest.
don't wait for somebody else to plant for you.
Right.
You need to start doing it for yourself. Even though we're trusting in the Lord that He is going to give us the increase, we're going to cooperate with Him. Just like when we cooperate with Him to save us.
Right.
We surrender, we make a yield, we turn to Him, and then He brings us near and closer to Him. And so we cooperate with Him with everything. God doesn't want to do everything on His own. He wants us to be a part of that blessing. He wants to share with us the blessings that come from the earth. And so that's why we want to encourage you also to go ahead and take that bean that we're going to give you again. So those of you who didn't get your potato and also get your bean and start growing some things. Get yourself ready, both how? Physically and spiritually. There's a work that needs to be done.
So happy planting, everyone.